Did Baba Vanga correctly predict World War III? I guess the short answer is no. She didn't. I suppose we could just stop the video here, but let's take a bit more of a look at all of the reasons why she didn't correctly predict World War III. If you don't know, Baba Vanga was a woman from Bulgaria who was born on January 31st, 1911, and she passed away August 11th, 1996. She was a blind woman who is known for being a mystic, clairvoyant, and an herbalist, and she made a whole list of predictions for the future, some of which have happened to come true. It is said that around 85% of her predictions have come true, but throughout the years there have been certain predictions that have been falsely attributed to her, so that number might be a little bit off. Regardless, she definitely did still manage to predict some things before they happened, which is more than I can say, so she definitely deserves the credit where it is due. Okay. So, what did Vanga say about World War III? Well, let's start off with when she predicted it would happen. Vanga predicted that 2010 would be the year that we would see the beginning of the Third World War. Well, 11 years later, we obviously know that never happened. Her prediction saw the war lasting through until October of 2014. This is a fair prediction as that would make sense in terms of a timeline compared to both World War I, which lasted 4 years, and World War II, which lasted 6. However, like I mentioned before, this obviously didn't happen, so that is probably the main reason this prediction was just simply incorrect. She did have some other things to say about the war, and there were some other things she predicted as well that obviously didn't come true either. She predicted that the war would start out with the usual styles of fighting we've seen in the past, and then it would gradually turn nuclear before turning chemical. Since the war never happened, this obviously couldn't possibly be true, but for the time this prediction was made, she actually did do a decent job at this one, because if the war had occurred, this is probably how it would go. I mean, we know how powerful and dangerous nuclear and chemical weapons can be, and how they could potentially put the entire world at risk. So it would make sense that in the case of another world war, it wouldn't exactly be the first thing we reach for. Inevitably, however, someone's ego or something along those lines will come into play, and things will only escalate to a place no one really ever wants to see them go. I mean, let's take World War II as an example. It didn't start out as a nuclear war, but things escalated at lightning speed. The world's very first nuclear weapons explosion took place on July 16, 1945 in New Mexico, when the first nuclear bomb was tested. Just 3 weeks later was the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. At the beginning of the war, I can't imagine this is where people saw things going, but that is what happens. Things escalate, people react, and it all spirals into something unbelievable and catastrophic. It is highly possible that if this were to happen, that would just be the end of humanity right there. We might just take things too far and end up making the world an unlivable place, or simply just blow up too much of the population. What I'm trying to say is that if we got to this point, the possibilities are endless and terrifying. Apparently sometime in the late 80s, Vanga said, quote, "Horror, horror. The American brethren will fall after being attacked by steel birds. The wolves will be howling in the bush and innocent blood will be gushing." End quote. There are some parts of this that are seemingly more literal than others, but I think the main message still stands, and that is how things would not be good. Assuming that if this were to ever occur and we didn't end up just ending the world right there and then, I suppose the rest of Baba Vanga's World War III predictions might also end up making a lot of sense. Vanga predicted that in 2011 we would already be beginning to see the results of the nuclear fallout despite there still being years of the war left. She predicted that by 2011 the northern hemisphere would not have any surviving animals or vegetation. Assuming when she says animals, she is excluding humans, this would be a huge problem. The northern hemisphere holds 6.4 billion people, which is 87% of the world's population. The northern hemisphere also holds the vast majority of Earth's landmass, so this whole thing would cause some major problems. I am currently standing in the northern hemisphere right now and can confirm that this prediction was of course another one that has not seemed to come true, but we can always take a moment to see what that would really mean had it come true. Well, there would obviously be an insane mass migration of people, but not everyone would be able to get out and flee somewhere else. There wouldn't only be a huge lack of resources in the northern hemisphere, but also worldwide. We constantly import and export so many goods, there are so many things that would be lacking, and without any vegetation or animals on the majority of Earth's land, we would have an extremely hard time feeding our huge population population. This would cause wars in and amongst themselves. It is probably most likely that if this were to have actually happened, if all the animals and vegetation was wiped out of the northern hemisphere, that probably would have included human life as well. And if it didn't, it's not likely that there would have been that high of an amount of people who had survived through chemical warfare like that killed all other living things. Vanga went on to predict that by 2014, most people will be suffering from skin cancer and other skin diseases as a consequence of the chemical warfare. Assuming that people were able to survive the war and the chemical warfare, this is probably something that we would see. It is unclear exactly how everyone would be affected or if skin disease would be the leading illness that needed to be worried about, but it is definitely a fair assumption that there would be some sort of a rise of illness after a chemical and nuclear war. If people themselves weren't contaminated during the actual war, the land, the water, and the remaining living things would all be contaminated from the war, so it would be extremely hard to avoid it. It is hard to say exactly what healthcare would look like at that point, and exactly who would have access to it, so it's tough to say if anyone would even be getting the medical attention they needed at that point. But again, we are here to talk today about if these predictions came true, which they didn't, and for that I think we can all be grateful. The final prediction that Baba Vanga made in reference to World War III is who she predicted would be doing well from the war. It has been written that Vanga said, quote, "Everything will melt away like ice, yet the glory of Vladimir, the glory of Russia are the only things that will remain. Russia will not only survive, it will dominate the world." End quote. Okay. So, obviously Vanga saw Russia as a powerhouse not to be messed with. She predicted that while everyone else was suffering and being destroyed, that Russia would remain intact and remain standing. Again, since this war never happened, this of course also didn't happen. It is tough to say if there was a third world war, who would be winning, who would be struggling, who would be invading who. It's just impossible for me to tell how accurate this prediction may have been. I mean, I'm no mystic or clairvoyant, so it just isn't my business making predictions like that, so I guess we can all say at this point, we know that the war didn't happen, which of course then invalidates the rest of the World War III predictions. Hopefully we are never in a position where we have to find out how correct her predictions might have been, because so far, most of them sound absolutely horrible. I guess this was just a super long way of saying that no, Baba Vanga didn't correctly predict World War III. She may have correctly predicted some things, but this just wasn't one of them. Thank you guys so much for checking out today's video. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed it today, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, LBQ fam, keep asking those questions.